Now on to part two from the Modern Progressive Art Rock series calendar from 2008, part two of 2008. Starting in July, I don't have anything for July actually at this point. Maybe at some point I'll find something. But August 11th sees the debut album from, and the only album, sadly, because the drummer eventually passed away. They did a couple songs. Um, UK's own Lehto the Pier, Indie Tronica, Fantasy Black Channel. Hopefully it's recording right now. Yeah. Um, and this is like gospel. It's like it's kind of schizophrenic and chaotic at points, but the keyboards and the fat synths, and some of the vocals are pretty good. The energy is off the charts on this thing. I mean, and it's like it's using synthesizers in a cool, energetic way. I mean, Shiny Toy Guns did similar things too, but this is like not like grade A or grade A plus Indietronica, like I put Apes and Androids, but it's at least on. It's probably better than the Chap even. This is really good, and it would always made me sad that we didn't have. No, the singer ended up doing his own music under La Priest, L.A. Priest or La Priest, which I'm actually just ordered something on Discogs today for that. But Fantasy Black Channel is a classic in sort of Indietronica history. That came out on August 11th, 2008. Um, so then let's see here, going more in the sort of post-punk influence art rock. We see the Stills. I think this might be their. They had one other record after this, maybe. Their album Oceans Will Rise. The U2 fan in me, of course, and I love Vast and Ours, of course, appreciates this album. I think this is the one I actually like the most, but I think the one before it, I can't remember this. I haven't listened to the Stills in a long time. There was one of them that I liked more than the other, clearly. A little bit like Disillusion and some other bands where they had two records. One was clearly better at the time. But yeah, Oceans Will Rise from the Stills came out on August 19th, 2008. So then a really big release. This is the second copy that I've got, the one that's not ruined. Uh, August 26th, 2008. I remember hearing about this and on the Dredge fans, and I kind of thought it sounded like One Republic with featured piano, but then I was totally wrong. The Reign of Kindo's Rhythm, Chord, and Melody. Fantastic debut on that. It was only a few months later, and I was telling a bunch of people about it, and everyone went ape shit for them. This is their finest work. Of course, they had the EP that came out a couple years before, the year before actually, and of course the members had been in This Day and Age, which I didn't feature. Maybe I'll make up and talk about the history of This Day and Age in this series soon on the calendar. But Rhythm, Chord, and Melody, jazzy pop, progressive, super fantastic drummer. Of course, the lineup has changed except Joey. Joey and I think the bass player may still have been around this whole time, but the rest of the band members have changed over the last whatever it's been 16 years, since 17 years now. The best track still remains probably the best song they ever did. Till We Make Our Ascent. That song just goes through that segue. I get goosebumps and it gets busy at the end. Um, Great Blue Sea. The moments in between. I hear that music play. Hold Out. October Storm. The title track. Something in the Way That You Are. Let It Go. Let It Go, of course, lyrically is super like creepy in some ways, like kind of poetic justice in a way to a very questionable you know doing Christmas things. So that was on August 26, 2008. So then we had the final release from I don't even have the date. It was in August of that year. I don't have the actual date down. Maybe it was the 10th. I have a zero, but I think I'm missing. Opus Dai's Touch the Sun, which Opus Dai they had put out here to Grom 2006. Their singer, his name wasn't it was Chris Paul, I believe. Um, he had left and they got a new singer, and this is just an EP. The new singer sound, I don't remember his name, sounded a lot like John Arch actually, which was actually good. I really liked a lot of this, but it was just an EP. It was like 5 or 6 songs, and this is the last thing they officially released. They put out a few songs. They were gonna put out another album, and it never happened. But that was in August 2008, and then I have another one from that. Should have noticed that when I was looking at the calendar. Warpaint, California's own. At the time, they had one male member, but they had the drummer, the guy who played. There's a lot of connections with the Mars Volta, but I forget who the drummer's. Jeremy, maybe I forget if it tells on here. Doesn't list the. But it was produced by John Frusciante, of course, who played with the Mars Volta later, and then with Chili Peppers, of course, and solo stuff. But Exquisite Corpse from Warpaint came out in August of 2008 initially. Then it was a different cover. It's just like a brown thing with their name. This is the 2009 one that includes the song Crimson. But yeah, this is from beginning to end. I still the most energetic thing they ever did. It's still my favorite. Um, but Elephants and some others. It's like a 30-35 minute EP, so it feels like almost like an album. But of course, their debut album would come out the next year. But next year was 2010 actually. But anyway, Exquisite Corp from Warpaint also in August 2008. So moving on to September sees another local Minnesota kind of building up to their masterpiece, which they a bunch of decent records, then one super masterpiece, but it wasn't this year. It was Lehto and Wright's Between Jigs and the Reels, which again, this is another one. I don't think this is live, even though the picture shows them live. Well, the picture also shows them in the studio, the drummer Matt Jacobs, but yeah, track number 6 and 7 is like a medley. It's like a suite. I buried my wife and damned on her grave, and danced on her grave. The gander and the gander in the prattle hole. Jerry's beaver. Yeah, I mean, I talked about some bands like Madeline the Well and having long titles. They're also in that category, but um Silver, I don't know. I mean, again, all the sort of Lehto and Wright albums that predate the one that came out, I'm going to talk about in 2010, are kind of a blur. They're all about equal. So, but they're all decent, but mostly folk rock albums that, with a Celtic element too. And Between the Jigs and the Reels, when Lehto and Wright came out on September 10th, 2008. So then the same day, actually, and I totally remember when they did this whole thing, and they just said people could download it. They didn't want to worry about, all that stuff. Marillion put out their double album, which could have been two separate albums, but I consider it one album still. Happiness is the Road, both Essence and the Hard Shoulder. And I just ordered the Hard Shoulder on vinyl, so I'll have that. I'm only missing a couple of their full lengths. I'll have every Marillion record on vinyl finally. My highlights on this are like Marzipan, Whatever Is Wrong With You was the first single. Wrapped Up in Time, Trap the Spark. It's one of I've talked about this before. It's one of those albums that I've listened to a decent amount, but I think if I listen to enough, if I really just discipline myself, I'd probably have a better sort of overall feeling. I don't think I look at like Pink Floyd's The Wall, maybe more like The Lamb Lies Down Broadway. Real Tears for Sale is an epic closer, and the title track on Essence is pretty epic. That's a live staple. Half Empty Jam, I think it's half is not listed on here, but that push comes to shove. Actually, probably my favorite track. I love the way it ends. It's like this jam that kind of builds, but anyway, maybe Half Full Jam. I know there was like two names for it. That came out on September 10th, 2008. So the day after 9/11 sees the debut release from basically, like, you could call them instrumental math rock. Again, math rock was a big deal in 2007, 2008. Battles, Fulls, even the influence of the Mars Volta. You have Adebisi, Shank. The clever title. This is the first album of a band called Adebisi Shank. I think it is. Yeah, this is the album of a band called Adebisi Shank. This is super energetic, like workout music. You could work out to battles too, but it's like Shunk is one of the titles. It's like 35 minutes, and it's perfect. Anyone could like this, pretty much anyone, because it's just the energy. You could almost dance to it. The follow up albums I like, but not as much. I felt like this was hit the spot for like less is more. Great energy, great flow. Adebisi Shank, I think they're from Scotland. Debut album came out on 9/11/2008. September 11th that year. So 2 days later, we see Amanda Palmer put out after the Dresden. I didn't have the Dresden Dolls, and you could call them artsy punk, because Amanda loves cabaret punk, but this album I feel like is a little more chamber, a little more art rock in some ways. Who killed Amanda Palmer? Of course, R.I.P. David Lynch. It's interesting. It's a reference to Twin Peaks, but Laura Palmer. This has a bunch of bangers. I love the record that followed it in 2012, which I'll be talking about behind me back there somewhere. And of course, Neil Gaiman, his name's kind of been stained a little bit. He's on here, but Astronaut, Leeds United, Guitar Hero. Of course, the game was a big deal at that time. Something in the Family. I can't read. She signed. I think I got her to sign it. Not the best signature ever, but yeah, I really enjoyed this record. This has some of her best songs on it. And that came out on September 13th, 2008. So fast forward 10 days, we had 3 albums that came out that day. On the 23rd of September 2008, first was the Age of Rockets. I just talked about in my CD collection video. Hannah, the second Age of Rockets album. I have to look up the first one and add it at some point. Very textured, kind of orchestral, progressive art rock. Andrew Futrell the production's pretty good on it, and it's very cohesive. It's a concept album. Yeah, I haven't listened to this in a long time, but I remember thinking I was, and other people were going to get into it more, and some people did enjoy it when they checked it out, but they've kind of become forgotten like a lot of these bands. But it's part indie tronica, part chamber rock, part just sort of art rock. Called Hannah, the second album from New York's own The Age of Rockets. So then the same day on the 23rd of September also saw Mason Proper put out their second album, their last album. Mason Proper, I think, looked up for their Ollie Oxen Free is the name of this. It's compared to like TV on the radio, yeah, and I like yeah, as in Blonde Redhead. And then also compares it to Anathello and Cloud Cult. So the chamber rock, But I concluded that this album wasn't as good as Your Martha's whatever from 2006, the debut album, but still pretty good. It reminds me more of Margot and the Nuclear Stone Souls than Anathello, though. A little more singer-songwriter at points, but yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, it's among the pantheon of chamber rock and art rock of this that year, and this style. It's certainly as a final record, pretty good. A lot of bands put out their final record in 2000. A lot of debut albums, a lot of final records. So then that was on the 23rd, and then also on the 23rd of September 2008 sees the final album, sadly, of One Woven, their album Designer Codes. This was their probably shot to say like breakthrough and find a larger audience. Big fan among the Dredge fans. It does remind me of Dredge in some ways. It's kind of textured post-rock, space rock. This album is a little more cleanly produced, you could say. One of the songs I know is called like not astronaut, but it had like the term what's the term of a cosmonaut? I believe cosmonaut. That was like one of the singles, but I mean you can see just that it's very retro like inspired, but very sort of like the cursive. But yeah, if you like Code 7 was kind of similar. Archive's a little similar, and Dredge. I mean, those kind of bands I would compare this to. And Designer Codes, I don't know if it's the best thing they did, but in some ways it's the most fulfilling because it's a full length. All the other, like their 8-Bit Monk was one of their other full lengths. I didn't like it nearly as much. But the other records I really liked from them a lot were just EPs. But yeah, I think Woven's a forgotten band I wish that more people knew. Designer Codes came out on September 25th. So that was a really big A. Those very small releases, but all of them really good between Age of Rockets, Mason Proper, and Woven. So then 2 days later, you see the final album from another Japanese band like Kasika, Mayumu's masterpiece, Ilya. This thing, pretty much everyone who hears it likes it. It has the kind of Japanese woo-woo style vocals, but classical music, progressive, a little hardcore, but not a lot, a little bit of screaming from the male singer, but the piano runs are super fast. Ilya it's the musicianship. It's one of the best sort of musicianship-based MPAR albums I've ever heard. The production's great. It's a female singer. She's doing a little almost operatic style. You think about like Diablo Swing Orchestra or something. There's a little bit of an opera style or Nightwish. Like think Nightwish meets art rock meets post rock, meets classical. And Nightwish has a classical influence. But Ilya's fantastic. Anyone who's never heard this now, trying to find a physical copy, it's always been you have to import it from Japan, and it's like 70 to 150 bucks. Anyway, August. Let's see, that was September 25th. So then on October, moving to October. The second album, and not the last album, but I kind of see as sort of the peak of their sort of success. Annuals, North Carolina's own at the time. Now some members moved to California. Such Fun came out on October 7th, 2008, which probably has my favorite song from them, Springtime. It's super uplifting. But Confessor, it's very, I mean, I love the first album, Be He Me, but I feel like Be He Me maybe is better beginning to end, but the best songs are better than even the best songs on Be He Me on this album. Was it Hair Grow, I think it is. There's a song called Hair Grow. Hair Don't Grow. Adam Baker's vocals are kind of very clean. They're all Yes fans. They use some like kind of Rick Wakeman like keyboard textures and layers. Yeah, talking. It's they also remind me of Local Natives. I always felt like Local Natives were very influenced by them, and they were. People never talked about that, but Annuals, Such Fun came out October 7, 2008. So you got yeah, like September 23rd, you had three albums that were big. Well, actually, technically three, but I look at it as two. As two separate ones. Well, I mean, one album, but two albums from one band that were released separately based on the label's decision, the band's decision not wanting to compromise. Margot and the Nuclear So-and-So's last great record before half the band left. Um, so Margot and the Nuclear So-and-So's released, yeah, it's like there were three albums that day on October 2008. One being Annual Such Fun, but the other being the two Margot and the Nuclear So-and-So's. So half the band left, including Andy Fry, that's the Fry brothers. But the other one's name. Look on, I should know my Margot and Nuclear So-and-So's history, but this is Animal, the one that was released individually, like on their own, like independently or whatever. And this is not Animal, the one that was the label released, Epic. Um, I'll admit, this one I heard first. I like the not Animal more because it has a couple songs that aren't. I mean, that was the thing is it's like half the songs were the same, half the songs were not. But yeah, this is sort of progressive chamber rock. One of the best kind of cases of a band sort of writing progressive chamber rock. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be long term. As I said, that was maybe I don't know, had anything to do with the label and more to do with just creative differences per se. I don't know, but they're a big ensemble, not as big as Typhoon or Polyphonic Spree, but not even maybe quite as big as Anathello, but still like they were like an 8, 9. They're probably close to like the touring band for Family Crest. But songs like Broad Ripple is Burning, Cold Kind, and Lemon Eyes. As Tall as Cliff, that's a banger. Tall as Cliff. Pages Written on a Wall has this bridge section that do 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 do, very kind of offbeat. It's in like 5, and it's very proggy. I love the feel on that. Children's Crusade on Acid, but that's on Not Animal, and then Animal has, I mean, I haven't listened to Animal in a long time. I listen to Not Animal occasionally. At the Carnival, I'm a Lightning Rod is good, one of the better tracks on here, but they're both on Spotify. I should probably go back to. I mean, some of the German Motor Car, Children's Crusade on it. Some of the tracks, of course, there is some crossover, but it should have been a double album. That would have been could have been in my top 5 albums probably that year. That wasn't. It was in the top 10 or 15, but it's hard to you put them together or whatever. But that was on October 2008. So and that was the peak. I was like, at that point, I'm like, I love a lot of this. I'm totally like wanted people to like. I thought Margot and Nuclear So-and-So, they played on what was like Craig Ferguson or something. They were getting exposure, but it just wasn't meant to be, as I found out. So then 2 weeks later, so you had these basically dates in the fall: September 23rd, October 7th, and then October 21st. Sees 2 absolute bombs that came out. Staple records, fantastic records. One being the only full length. I could have included the EPs, I suppose. Again, it's like Arizona's own, the Stiletto Formal, upside down, explanation point, Fiesta, 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 exclamation point. Just Fiesta times 4, Fiesta. This band. I mean, they're a lot like the Mars Volta, a lot, and they use cello. It's like the Mars Volta with cello. But beyond, there's a lot of bands that were doing music like Portugal the Man and City of Sound locally here around that same time, a little bit after that, were very similar to Mars Volta and that band Closure in Moscow later. That it bugged me. I didn't City of Sound not so much, but Portugal the Man and some of these others. This band somehow was managed to actually take that strong influence, but also just kind of the compositions really work. They even use Murs, the rapper, that was friends of the band, I guess. He's on one song. We are all the Muckrakers. The title track, We're Sleeping Our Way to the Top. That's the one that features Murs, the rapper, and yeah, it's a little. There's a few expletives in there, but the music and the sort of flow of that track makes it one of the best songs on here. 50 cc's of anything potent. Nightcap at the Santa Fe. I I couldn't believe how much I love this album. I kept on listening to it over. The energy is so good, and I just the dreamy sort of textures with the cello. Just it was so good, and it was almost too good to be true. And I almost burnt down on it as much as I still love it. Mask of the Phantasm is probably the best example of a band that was very influenced by the Mars Volta, but went in their own way. That did it without sounding like a copycat. Kyle Howard was the singer. I know he eventually moved to LA and was forming another band. I don't know if they ever did anything. I should look that up. It's like the Jared Drought and Struggle and stuff. But Solo Forma, Fiesta, Fiesta, Fiesta. So on the 21st of October. So then the same day, band that has their Mars Volta influence, especially this period, the early stuff, it's kind of starting to shed it a bit. But Ben Sinister, their finest work also. So, and this was a 5-star album. It became, I still think it's 5 stars. Perfect record. Stories of Brothers, Tales of Lovers. The quote from Dan Moxon, I had not heard it, but they hadn't posted anything. They put out the self-titled EP about a year before that, but it's like, where the hell is this band? When are they going to do something else? We only got an EP, and Time Breaks Down was one of the best songs I've written of the decade. And I want to do a Ben Sinister song list. I need to do that, a ranking soon, after listening to the new album again. This is like the quote was we love it when you have an album that you want to basically listen to the beginning and the end. You want to hear all at once. It's best appreciated and taken in it all at once. And this is like 40 to 45 minutes and it flows perfectly. Super big classic rock element. There's one track on here though, Demise, which is probably my favorite song. Kind of reminds me of some of the Stories of Brothers, Tales of Lovers stuff from 2005 with the sort of dynamics, but the production's better, but it has that build up, that do 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 do. But the classic rock stuff, even the reference to I heard the news today, oh boy, the Beatles, but Jimmy Brown sounds like, Billy Joel, of course. The same things, a lot of it sounds like Billy Joel. Brothers of Humankind, CT, because Given to the Night, Dr. Lee, vintage sort of analog, keyboard, like Deep Purple like textures. I think they found themselves, even though I loved Swords of Brothers, they topped it, and I couldn't believe it, how good this was. They played the whole thing live, and they played it in Winnipeg, but it would have been a 13-hour drive. I should have gone to see it back then, but, what can you do? Because I never got to see them. I got to see them years later, at least, but not having to, get a passport. But that was on October 21st, 2008. So those big 3 days that fall. Then 6 days later sees I don't know if it was the final release. I think they put out one other album. And I've always been bugged by the way the singer sings, swallows close to the mic. But other than that, band Skeleton's Money album, which was getting a lot of play on the local college station, Radio K here. And I like it. I mean, it's similar to Dirty Projectors, and I would kind of struggle a little more with Dirty Projectors, even though the guitar kind of sounds a little bit like Zeppelin 3. This was a little bit better, although, yeah, they did put out a follow-up. I remember that, and I wasn't as into it. It was like a reunion album. It was like maybe 10 years ago, but it wasn't quite 10 years ago. Anyway, Skeleton's Money album came out on the 27th of October 2008. Then on Halloween 2008, I remember this. I think this is the same day that I ended up seeing We Valedictorians, which was Jordan Gatesmith, who later did Total Babe and Howler. And I was out in LA doing other stuff. But I remember I saw his band that day. It was the same day the Nomia band put out their Nomia, local band, heavy post-rock band, put out their debut EP. It was just online. It was 3 tracks. They're all like 10 minutes long. It was fantastic, and everyone that that did check it out loved it. It's just, I don't know if it's maybe on Spotify or Bandcamp. I should revisit that. I love their debut album, which came out like 6 years later. It was the only one. It was Iron and Rust or whatever, but Nomi EP arguably was just as good. That's post-rock the way I like it. It's very punchy. Kind of reminded me of Russian Circles or Long Distance Calling. So speaking of post-rock, then on the 7th of November, God is an Astronaut put out their self-titled album. That was right when I was getting into them, and I think I liked the previous record more, the one from 2005, Bright Lights or whatever, Bright is Violent. But yeah, this album still they used the pianos, used the little samples and stuff. God is an Astronaut, the recent stuff has kind of lost me. They haven't done as music I liked as much, but this is in the peak period where this album, the one before it, especially, are among the best stuff they did. So that was on November 7th, 2008. Then on the 18th of God's National from England, I believe, by the way. Because I've been including some post-rock stuff, but I have my limits on post-rock, because if I'm going to include every post-rock release on this calendar, it's going to be 10,000 albums long. So November 18th sees the final album from Anathello, Canopy Glow, which is the most polished from a sort of production and sort of sonically. And some of the best songs they did, but it's not as much in like they'd done Floating World a couple of years before and sort of blew up to some degree among like sort of the indie scene, the Pitchfork scene. But even though Pitchfork hated their records, one of the worst reviews they ever wrote, millions of bad reviews, of terrible reviews. But Canopy Glow has songs like Noni's Field, Northern Light, The River. Um, yeah, I mean it's an uplifting album. It's not religious sounding, and I mean I don't like it as much as Floating World, but I don't notice the swallowing the mic as much. One nice thing about it, but yeah, I mean if they went out on a great note, a lot of these bands that put out final albums like that, like Woven and the industry kind of swallowed them up, then they just weren't meant to be. We had a lot of debut albums 2008. It was almost a transitional year, and a lot of like swan song albums or like gap albums like King's XXXV. um but Canopy Glow definitely one of the best albums from that year. The only other record I have on the calendar, of course, is the in effect their debut solo album from Steven Wilson, Insurgentes, which I like some of it. I don't know, I mean it's admittedly it's not as accessible or addictive as most of his other records, almost all of them I actually say, but it's almost the most sort of interesting from a an approach from a composition approach. He was doing different things. It didn't sound like Porcupine Tree. It sounded like maybe the early Porcupine Tree. Some of those sort of a lot of samples, a lot of kind of influenced by. I mean, it's not prog as much as the early prog stuff. He would do that on the next record more, like the King Crimson. But I think of it as much for the fact that there's the one song that talks about hating what is it? Not iPhones, but MP3 players or in iTunes and actually he was destroying. Was he destroying? What's the one? I never had the Apple MP3 players, but anyway, why am I spacing on the title? Because I don't like Apple, but anyway, there's a video and there's a documentary on Insurgentes from Steven Wilson where it shows him destroying iPods. I was thinking of, yeah, he hates iPods, those sort of music listening culture, in a jukebox mentality. Um, but I don't know if he would still do that now. But that's about it. I mean, I know this is another epic series of videos. This is part 2, and I'm gonna try to do 2009, which sadly 2009, sadly or not sadly, is even longer. Well, maybe it's not. It felt like it was my list was longer from my albums of the year standpoint, but and then I'm gonna stop and maybe just go through and try to get through the A to Z on the CDs and focus on some other stuff. But that's about it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.